What if you were on a date? Now, the first thing you think of might be romance or a fancy dinner. But what if this date was different? What if this date was with planet Earth? The image in your head now is probably beautiful waterfalls and luxurious beaches. But we're creating a different Earth. There's plastic litter, polluted rivers, and extreme weather patterns. Not so beautiful for a perfect date, is it? But don't worry, because I have good news. Though it feels like a formidable problem, we have the power to solve it. Because your seemingly small choices, they can actually have a big impact. In fact, if everyone were to adopt one sustainable habit to their lives, we're already making a difference. Hopefully, by the end of this, you'll know how you're going to be a part of that difference. But for me, it involves swapping my dress for a t-shirt and jeans, and a shovel, because I was about to date the earth for the very first time at an urban farm. But my journey actually began 2 generations ago with my grandmother. And yes, like every grandma, she's constantly nagging at me to fix my posture, clean my room, and her personal favorite, stop disagreeing with me about everything. But I choose to ignore all of that, partly because she cooks the best food that I've ever tasted, but also because her stories about growing up on her family farm had me enchanted by farming. Surprisingly, they were purely entertainment until one day I came home from school where we'd been discussing the impact of agriculture in environmental science. She told me a new story. Let me set the stage. It's 1961 India, and she lives in the village of Potarlanka, Andhra Pradesh. She's the only 15-year-old girl in her village who attends school, and she's just finished her 5-mile trek home when she finds a stranger at her house. He tells her father that he isn't producing a high enough yield and that to stay in business, they need to employ a white chemical powder called superphosphate. Now, despite their efforts, it seems like if they want to make a living, they have no choice but to use it. So the man sprays the chemicals over the crops and he leaves, as my grandma's family looks out on their lands in defeat, forced to abandon the traditional farming methods that they had been using for generations. Surprisingly, 6 decades later, the situation isn't very different. Conventional farming, which is everything you see at the supermarket that isn't labeled as organic, utilizes synthetic chemicals and fertilizers to maximize yield, and it's the primary method of food production today. Fortunately, though, more eco-friendly forms of farming have also been growing in recent years, especially urban farming, which is the production and distribution of food in or near a city. There are many different types of urban farming, but my story is focusing on a small community plot. The urban farm that I chose to work on employed the principles of regenerative agriculture, which follows one basic tenet: leave the soil better than you found it. And don't use any chemicals in the process. But it was hearing my grandma's story that really made me curious on what farming is like today and what impact I might be making by pulling weeds every weekend. And so I did what any pro researcher would have done. I Googled it, and here's what I found. The agricultural sector is responsible for using 70% of the global freshwater supply, 3/4 of deforestation, and 23% of greenhouse gas emissions. Now within this, comparing conventional agriculture to urban, you find that conventional agriculture, despite a higher and faster yield, uses more resources, leads deforestation in its search for monocultures. It uses more fossil fuels per acre and can have negative health impacts. Plus, the majority of conventional farmland is used to grow livestock feed, but only a very small fraction of global calories actually come from consuming livestock. On the other hand, urban farming uses less resources, existing space, cools down city temperatures, and has lower greenhouse gas emissions because it repurposes organic waste as fertilizer and has a small carbon footprint due to such a short farm-to-table distance. Plus, it has community benefits. Many low-income areas don't have too many grocers, and urban farms often locate in these areas, thereby providing a chance for employment and better access to food, which increases the amount of people that are able to mitigate their food insecurity. And so what's even more surprising is that according to Feeding America, Tarrant County, which is the county that I live in, was among the hungriest counties in the United States of America in 2017. And the farm that I worked at donated half of its produce to the Tarrant County Food Bank. Now, all of this was a surprise to me. And it made me realize that our small choices, like what we choose at the grocery store, can have huge environmental impacts. I wished I had known this earlier, so I set out to tell people. I created educational presentations about the American food system, and I advocated for people to buy from urban farms and volunteer at urban farms, and if not, to at least buy organic or locally grown produce. As the farm's official student ambassador, I was able to present to visiting schools, potential investors, and even at a local conference hosted by Tarrant County Food Bank themselves. Now, all this isn't to tell you that you need to go to an urban farm if you want to make a difference. But I am saying that everyone can do something. In fact, some of you have already made efforts in your lives to reduce waste, and I encourage you to keep making more eco-conscious decisions. After all, the goal is that this first date leads to a lifelong relationship with the earth. But if you're unsure where to start, here are some ideas and guidelines. Recycle. Recycling diverts landfill waste and is a lower energy process than manufacturing from scratch. But make sure you know what plastics are recyclable in your locality and that you sort plastic waste properly. Shop for clothes that are made from recycled or organic materials and have lower energy processes. But be careful of greenwashing. To avoid this, I suggest that you explore brands recommended in articles that are focusing on sustainable and ethical fashions. Plant trees. Use public transport or bike or walk places when possible. Unsubscribe from all of those email lists that, let's be honest, you don't really care about, but you somehow ended up on because they contribute a surprising amount to carbon emissions. Participate in local cleanups and pick up trash. Advocate for change in your area. Maybe your apartment complex doesn't have a recycling system, and that's something that you want to change. And the last thing that I'm going to suggest, though there is no limit to the things you can do, is to switch from single-use to reusable bags and containers. But whatever you choose, remember that education is important, not only for practicality, but for motivation. Know why you're making lifestyle changes, and encourage other people to join you in making these positive changes. So, I told you how I made a difference by building on my grandma's connection to farming from decades earlier, and how you can start making a difference today. My message is simple. Take action. Your actions matter. I shared how mine do. Environmental degradation is a reality no matter where we live. And we're currently using resources at a rate that's consuming nearly 2 planet Earths, thereby endangering all living things. We must work to treat the one that we have with compassion, and everyone has a part to play. So my question to you is, now that you know you can make a difference, what will you do? What's your perfect first date?